Welcome to Accidentally Autistic. This week
we are doing Cecily Cardew from Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest.
Lovely. I have to admit that I actually have no real concept of like what happens in this play. I spent my whole life pretending I understand the importance of being earnest, because like I understand it's about like two guys who like pretend to be called Ernest, for some women who say they want an earnest man.
Yes.
But I don't know anything else about it, and I've just nodded along every time anyone's mentioned it.
Okay, so there's the four main characters who are the two couples. There's a man called Jack and his best friend Algie, and it is revealed that Jack has a house in the country. Like, obviously he has a house in the country, but like he has been lying to Algie about like where the house is and like all of his life in the country. And it turns out that he has a pretty young ward named Cecily Cardew, and that in the country he calls himself Ernest, and in town he calls himself Jack, because he wants to like have separate lives. And when he's in the country he's like, oh yes, my like raucous younger brother Jack, he's so like no, I'm wrong. In town he's Ernest, and in the country he's Jack.
Right.
He's like my brother Ernest.
Yeah.
So he tells lots of stories about his like terrible brother Ernest and all the scrapes he gets into.
Sure.
And then he explains this to Algie, and Algie is like, so you have this young ward who's heard lots of stories about your friend Ernest. How interesting. And so he finds out the address of the house, and goes and pretends to be Uncle Jack's brother Ernest.
Right.
And the other woman is Algie / Ernest's cousin, I think, Gwendolyn, and Jack / Ernest, and she have been like flirting for some time, but haven't, like, he proposes to her at the beginning of the play and she accepts, but then her mother is the mother troublesome aunt who gets in the way. And she sits down with Jack and she's like, so where are your parents from, blah blah blah, how much money do you make, where do you live? And he's like, oh, I live in this street. And she's like, which number? And he says, and she's like, oh, the lesser side. So she asks about his parents and he's like, I don't know my parents, I lost my parents. And she's like, to lose one parent is misfortune, to lose both strikes with carelessness. And then he reveals that he was found as a child having been abandoned in a handbag in the cloakroom at Victoria Station, the Brighton line. And she does her whole handbag, like, very famous. Yeah. So she refuses to let him get married. So then Gwendolyn sneaks away in secret to the same country house to see him. So he has decided to kill off his brother Ernest next time he goes back to the country, because Cecily is getting too interested in Ernest. Right. So Algie arrives and is like, I'm Jack's brother Ernest, and everyone's like, oh great, like, come on, unpack your bags. And then Jack arrives in mourning and they're all like, oh no, what's happened? And he's like, my brother Ernest was carried away in Paris of a severe chill. And then they're like, he's in the drawing room. And then, you know,
okay, that's a great setup. Yeah. Okay.
A comedy ensues. Yeah. So Cecily, the young pretty ward,
lovely.
When she's described quite a lot by Jack to Algie in the first couple of scenes, and Jack describes her as having a capital appetite. She goes on long walks and pays no attention at all to her lessons. So I was like, same. And he also says Cecily isn't romantic, which, like, at the time we were just like, okay, but she is insanely romantic to the point where, like, this is just like masking 101. Like, this is like the female autism phenotype. So she's very like inattentive, as is Gwendolyn. They both have like this strange notion where they want to marry a man named Ernest. Like, both of them say to their respective suitor, it's always been my dream to marry a man named Ernest, and both of them are like, shit. Gwendolyn also, just as an aside, like, demands a proper proposal from Jack because he doesn't properly ask her and then says something, and she's like, no, you have to ask me properly, and like forces him to go through the whole proper proposal. Yeah, you have to do things properly. So when Algie arrives and is like, you must be my little cousin Cecily, and she says, you are under some strange mistake. I'm not little. In fact, I believe I'm more than usually tall for my age. So like, she's taken what he said very seriously. Like, she's not saying it sarcastically, I think. Obviously it's a play, so it depends how you read it, but like, you are under some strange mistake is quite a...
Yeah.
She's not like, oh no, I'm very tall. Like, you know, she's...
Yeah.
So she's very literal, and in the stage direction it says that Algie is rather taken aback when she says this, and she also like, I believe, is like, she's not like, I am tall for my age, she's like, I believe I'm unusually tall, but based on the evidence that I have, I'm going to say this, but it's not.
Yeah.
And then she's like, oh, that I've heard you're very wicked, and he says he's not wicked, and she says, I hope you've not been leading a double life pretending to be wicked and being really good all the time. That would be hypocrisy. And he looks at her in amazement, which he basically just does throughout this whole interaction.
You are my little cousin Cecily, I'm sure.
You are under some strange mistake. I'm not little. In fact, I believe I'm more than usually tall for my age. But I am your cousin Cecily.
And despite being like hyper romantic and having romanticized this man she's never met, because his name is Ernest, she never flirts with him, and when he flirts with her, she's quite like uncomfortable and doesn't know what to do. And she says, I don't think it can be right for you to talk to me like that. Miss Prism, who's her tutor, never says such things to me. Like, no, obviously. And when Jack arrives and is like, my brother has died, she's like, no, there's been a terrible mistake, he's here, and goes and fetches him. And then Jack is obviously can't explain why he's annoyed, but is clearly like offended, and Algie tries to shake his hand and Jack refuses, and Cecily like forces him publicly to shake his hand and is like, if you don't do it, I shall never speak to you again, like, you're brothers and you have to be on good terms. And like, this is conducted in front of like the tutor and like the rector. There's a whole public, she's not like, let's leave these two to work out their differences. She's like, no, you have to shake hands now. And then
you will be on good terms.
Yeah, and then you're done. And she refuses to entertain hypotheticals, which Gwendolyn also does, where both the guys are like, what if my name wasn't Ernest? And they're both like, but it is. So we're fine. Like, and they also don't think like, maybe his name isn't Ernest, maybe that's why he's saying this. Like, they're just like, what a strange thing to say.
You don't mean to say, though, do you, that you couldn't love me if my name wasn't Ernest?
But your name is Ernest.
Yes, I know it is, but supposing it was something else.
Well, that is clearly a metaphysical speculation. And like most metaphysical speculation, has very little reference at all to the actual facts of real life as we know them.
So then, Algie is like making love to Cecily, not in the in the Wildian way, and she's like, oh, we've been engaged for months. And he's like, what? And she has concocted this engagement because she expected him at some point to come to the house and for them to fall in love, because this is a sensible thing that happens. This is a plot, yeah. So she reveals to him that, as far as she's concerned, they've been engaged for like 6 months, and then relates to him the narrative of their relationship, including their like week-long breakup that they had, because it's not a real engagement unless it has been broken off at least once.
So, when was the engagement actually settled?
On the 14th of February last. After a long struggle with myself, I accepted you under this dear old tree here. And this is the box in which I keep all your dear letters.
My letters? But my own sweet Cecily, I have never written you any letters.
You need hardly remind me of that, Ernest. I remember only too well that I was forced to write your letters for you. I wrote always 3 times a week, and sometimes oftener.
Do let me look at them.
Oh, no. I couldn't possibly. They would make you far too conceited. The 3 you wrote me after I had broken off the engagement are so beautiful and so badly spelled that even now I can hardly read them without crying a little.
Was our engagement ever broken off?
Yes, of course it was.
What?
On the 22nd of last March. You can see the entry if you like. Today I broke off my engagement with Ernest. The weather still continues charming.
Why on earth did you break it off? What had I done? I had done nothing at all. Cecily, I'm very much hurt indeed to hear you broke it off, particularly when the weather was so charming.
Well, it would hardly have been a really serious engagement if I hadn't broken it off at least once, Ernest. But I forgave you before the week was out.
But she knows that they're fake because she's like, you don't need to remind me that I wrote these for you. Like, I'm aware of reality.
Yeah.
So there's this weird kind of entertaining of the two things. She carries her diary around all the time and like copies things that people say into it word for word. When he like compliments her, she's like, oh, I want to write this in my diary. And he's like, oh, you keep a diary, that's nice. Can I read it? And she's like, no, of course not. It is simply a very young girl's record of her own thoughts and impressions and consequently meant for publication. When it appears in volume form, I hope you will order a copy.
I've literally made diary entries being like, when this is published, please excise all names. I will forget to reread this diary before I give it to a publisher. I'm just going to hand it over, but this is the note.
I like only ever made diaries when I would like read famous people's diaries and be like,
I would definitely like write more when I'd been inspired by
but yeah, she copies out word for word things people say. So she's, pray Ernest, do not stop. I delight in taking down from dictation. I have reached absolute perfection. You can go on, I'm quite ready for more. Algernon, somewhat taken aback, coughs, and she says, oh, don't cough, Ernest. When one is dictating, one should speak fluently and not cough. Besides, I don't know how to spell a cough. And then he says that he loves her wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly, and she says, I don't think you should tell me that. Hopelessly doesn't seem to make much sense, does it? She also has like quite interesting opinions about books. So she and her tutor are talking about like the 3-volume novel that Moody sends us. And she's like, I think it very unfair that good people end happily and bad people unhappily, which is very like a nuanced way where you're like, something about these rules seems wrong. This seems like a flat interpretation that I'm not happy with. And obviously because it's like a wild play, everyone is like slightly wicked or like wants to be wicked, wants to be thought of as wicked. When Algie first arrives, like when he's announced before he's actually come on stage, she's like, oh, it's Uncle Jack's wicked brother. I've never met any really wicked person before. I feel rather frightened. I'm so afraid he'll look just like everyone else. And also, when Gwendolyn arrives and is then like very confused by the presence of this like pretty 17-year-old,
Right.
She's like, do you mind if I look at you through my glasses so I can properly like see you? And Cecily says, oh, not at all, Gwendolyn, I'm very fond of being looked at. And she also hates like beating around the bush. She thinks that whenever one has something unpleasant to say, one should say it as fast as possible, as bluntly as possible. At one point, Gwendolyn says to her, couldn't you cough to get the men's attention? And Cecily says, but I haven't got a cough. Like,
Yeah, sure.
Just,
yeah.
and also, she's very literal, like, Lady Bracknell, the interfering aunt, at one point tells her to turn around, like, so she can see her profile and see what social possibilities she has in her profile, and Cecily just turns all the way around. So, yeah, that's my...
Yeah, I love it. Yes.
Yes, she's very good. I love her.
Yes, that's very sweet. I want to play her.
Yeah, no, it would be very you, like her and like the Enchanted April lady.
Need to finish reading Enchanted April so I can do Lottie.
Yes, Lottie, thank you. I was like, what's her name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A name I still respond to.